So thanks a lot for the kind invitation. It's a very big pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for the very inspiring presentation. So we have three very good guests. So we have first Marion Jansen from the OECD. I will do brief introductions. I'm Swiss, so I can either be precise or pragmatic. So I chose to be pragmatic. So she's the director of the OECD Trade and Agriculture Directorate. So welcome. So we have Mr. Bill Emmott here. So Mr. Emmott is the former editor-in-chief of The Economist. So very glad for you to attend here. And last, we have my former and dear colleague, Giovanni Barone-Adesi from the University of Lugano. So during the speech, Professor Prodi, I'm going to call you Prof now, because I think we can also do that, mimicking the University of Bologna.
Shorter.
It's shorter. So Prof told us about the place of Europe in the world, and the fact that the world is changing and is changing against us. And so we can come back to that a bit later, but he ended the talk, and this is something that struck me pretty deeply. He's saying that we're lacking big decisions. So Europe has been lacking big decisions. So maybe the first questions to each of you, I know it's a tricky question, is that if you had a magic wand and you can do one big decision for Europe going forward, what would that be? Maybe, Marion, we start with you?
I think that would not be suitable for me to make a wish, but I can tell you that Europe has done big things, and we referred yesterday to it. The GDPR, the regulation on digital for digital rules was big, and the environmental legislations that came out of the European Union in recent years were big decisions and big changes.
Mr. Emmott.
Thank you. My answer would be actually something I also said yesterday, really, which is that the big decision should be to agree to lend Ukraine 140 billion euros on the basis of the Russian frozen central bank assets to give real long-term support for Ukraine, which is the most critical issue and crisis facing European defense policy, in the security of Europe, the politics of Europe, and the economy of Europe. And if we can't decide that, it seems to me we are following the failure of that Romano has said, we can't decide anything. We must do that, and at the same time persuade the Germans that they really should transfer their Taurus missiles to Ukraine. For God's sake.
Thank you. Giovanni.
Well, if I had to do something about Europe, I would consider the historical experience. Eastern Europe was dominated by the Polish Empire in the 14th century. They stopped the Turks and freed Vienna, etc. And then in one century collapsed. Why? Because of unanimity. Any Polish aristocrat, I'm afraid for my class, but basically had the right of veto. So basically they couldn't do anything. The issue is once you remove unanimity, is what you can put in the place of unanimity. Because you cannot force people to follow the majority if they do not think their rights are preserved. So probably the solution will be what we did in the Pacific community when I was living in Canada, which is basically say the European Union is a meeting place, groups of countries that like major integration go ahead, and then there is a surprising effect that takes over. People who are against joining, after a few months, find out that generally, if things are done well, economic losses for them are more important than what they're trying to preserve. So they join without feeling threatened. But unfortunately, Europe is built on a very rigid system, which, as Professor Prodi was saying, is very hard to change.
Oh, I have a simple proposal, I think that democracy is important, and democracy means people. So my proposal is very simple. We need an informal, because it's not, let's say, under a constitutional possibility, an informal referendum over all Europe on unanimity. So people has to give a message, a political message, whether they agree or not. We can't go on with uncertainty for another 25 years. People say, look, you want unanimity, you don't want unanimity, and is also this the only instrument to prepare a defense for Ukraine. Because if you spend more, but you have 27 armies, we are like in the Belgian army during the First World War, in which it was impossible to speak between the officer and the soldiers because they spoke a different language, And so this is the risk of Europe.
Thank you. You also started the speech by saying that it's important for democracy that we stick together, and you just referred to that again. So how do we stick together? What are the big rules or the big tricks to help Europeans stick together and not be feeling non-Europeans? So how do we make us stick together against the rest?
Well, I believe in democracy. I say that if the majority of European people say we have to go together, the government will follow. But if not, and somebody can get out, there is no problem, or remain in Europe as simply in a big trade area, But of course, after Brexit, nobody will get out, So this is a clear point. But why not to have different speeds? You want to stay in a trade area? Fine. You want to have a common army? Okay. And then you leave the way open if a new country can come in European army. But if you want to defend Ukraine or let's say Mediterranean from Turkey and Russia together, of course you need one in command. It's very simple. The historical link to ancient Poland is fantastic.
Yes.
It was just like now. The lords of Poland, they didn't agree to defend the country.
There was also many discussions about science and technology, and I think it's very interesting. We had the university here, so that's what we stand for. And so it's true that we see, all over the world, decreased budget for education, science, and technology. We see that also in Switzerland, which is a bit puzzling if you think about our debt to GDP ratio and the cost of, borrowing that we face. And so this is also something general in Europe. So what is it that should be done about, developing more science, innovation, technology in Europe, not trading off, soccer players to Chinese engineers, maybe, but what could we do in general? Maybe Mr. Emmott.
Difficult. Thank you. It is a difficult question. I tend to think that on this continent and in this, and by the way, since I have an English accent, you have to acknowledge that although I live in Ireland, so I'm a European citizen. But there, Ireland has a bigger problem with neutrality and understanding what on earth it means as Switzerland. So therefore, I'm I have a foot in many different camps. But I think that a lot of the issue about technology in Europe is an issue about finance and startups. We have brilliant minds, we have brilliant entrepreneurs. Typically, the barrier comes when they try to finance the growth and get the scale of their startup up to, if you like, American-style levels. There are many exceptions. Plenty of companies have succeeded. But the big thing that holds Europe back technologically is the entrepreneurship and the inability to really scale up startups. I don't think it's a bottom-up problem in universities. It's to do with the market, to do with the financing opportunities. Now, I think that there are some European Union level things that can make a more unified, liquid capital market that then makes it easier to finance at an American-style scale for rising businesses. And that perhaps is the policy issue. But the real issue is about allowing people to spin out their brilliant ideas from the University of della Svizzera Italiana, create a company, and then create it to be rivaling OpenAI.
Yeah, we're trying very hard to do that here, but thank you very much. So to go back to that, Giovanni, you know, privately, when in the past we've talked about the difficulty of funding and the integration of capital markets in Europe and all the fragmentation. Going back to Mr. Emmott's comment, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that national governments should not have so much control on their markets. On the other side, I don't think you can simply impose rules from the European community on everybody. Should be the free competition between markets that decides that. And perhaps we should learn from the two most successful countries in Europe in the new economy. They are Switzerland and Netherlands. They're not Germany and France. Perhaps there are some lessons to be learned there.
Ms. Jansen, from the OECD, on science, technology, and the future of Europe.
I think I'm from the generation of Europeans, so I'm German. But I come from a border city, so from the border with the Netherlands and Belgium. And seeing the European Union I've seen the European Union become what it is during my lifetime. So I've seen borders disappear. I have seen 3 currencies in my wallet disappear and turn into one. I didn't need a Belgian franc anymore, Dutch guilder, and a German mark, but only the euro. And I've seen the education system change. I'm one of the first generation of Erasmus students. I think many European Union students now consider it normal that you can go abroad and study. But it wasn't normal when I entered university. And we now saw in the context of Brexit and also in the relationship of Switzerland with the European Union, suddenly the question arising, can our students still be part of Erasmus or not? When it comes to investing in science, the pooling of funding for research through European institutions has made it possible to take advantage of economies of scale in research. And here again, the question, does Switzerland continue to have access to European research funding? Does the UK continue to have access to it once the relationship with the European Union changed? Was an important issue for the academic landscape. So when it comes to research, and to learning, really the European Union has been a success.
Prof, you agree?
Look, I agree on what has been told, but I want to stress that we must have some joint project. The only success in the new industries in Europe was the Airbus. Why? Because they put together in a voluntary way Germany, France, and Germany, France, Spain, and all the let's say European countries doing this. And we should do something similar, to have a project with one authority, because if we have one success, I think that this will say, but now what worries me that we have a different scale of the necessity of capital for that. And if I read the letter report that 300 billion euros of European saving every year go to United States, I say, well, look, the first thing is how to collect it for some joint project. But this needs a political authority, because the voluntary project was, when I read the history of Airbus, it was a unique case of people that share the same idea. You know, it was so difficult, but it was a moment, and we must make this process as a normal process.
So another, big word that we heard this morning multiple times was democracy. So we hear that, many times on the positive side, on the negative side. And it's true, being a Swiss person growing in Switzerland, it seems obvious that, democracy and wealth, richness goes hand on hand, but it doesn't seem to be necessarily the case anymore. I have discussion with students, and with my own kids, they say, look, China is an authoritative country, they don't have democracy, they're all doing very well, so why don't we do the same? So how would you answer to these concerned students that they seem to be lacking a little bit of beliefs in democracy? Yes?
My answer is pay attention to what's happening in China. Because China is not doing that well economically. It has deflation. It has suffered a property crash. It has rising long-term unemployment among young people, as Romano knows better than the rest of us. It is, in a way, what China is doing, it is sort of copying the same problem that Japan experienced in the 1990s, which is that having had a fantastic period of success, it then centralized control too much and became too rigid and lost some of the ability of reinvention. And the big question about China is when you have a centralizing dictatorship, which has become much more centralized control under Xi Jinping than it was under previous presidents, as Romano said in his remarks, whether actually you can continue to succeed. Any country to continue to succeed for decade after decade needs constant reinvention, rediscovery of new things. The second point I would say to students is, yes, we are all, of course, paying attention to China and America because they are so big. But please pay attention also to what's going on in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. The countries around China, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and of course, above all, India, are all growing more rapidly than China now. The trend of the previous 30 years has changed in the last 5 to 8 years, and now the growth is coming in the area around. And this is no small thing. Leave outside 1.5 billion people in India, of course, but the others I mentioned, have as large a population as the European Union combined. So this is a significant development, and there's actually the future. Maybe China's the past. Provocative comment.
Yes, thank you for this.
But in politics, you must make choices. I remember that once in China, I was asked to participate to a very strange seminar. Why China does not win football games? And my answer is very simple. On the afternoon, you study mathematics and you don't play football. It's a choice. And this is, they make choice,
Well, they're trying to improve now on the football side. Maybe Giovanni, democracy, economic growth. You have any thoughts on this?
There are different stages of economic development. And in the initial stage, if you have a very static, primitive society, dictatorship and protectionism may help mobilize energies. But then you cannot develop a sophisticated economy on that basis. You have to move to the market. And China, for a few years, did that in the sense that the government let firms free to do whatever they thought to be convenient. Their idea was that they had lots of ants trying to find a good path to get the goodies. Then, once they became successful, Xi Jinping decided that the party had to reassert his authority and suffocated the entrepreneurial freedom. We saw lots of entrepreneurs disappearing or going to jail or whatever. And everybody was scared. And so, of course, the economy made several wrong steps. Too much of investment decided from Beijing, and once in a while they did something right still, but just by chance. Generally it was a disaster, as Mr. Emmott was saying.
Yeah, I'm an economist, so I should say something on democracy and growth. I would agree with the assessment we just heard, but I find it hard to see why young people would not cherish democracy on the European continent. Maybe it is because we are by now so much used to certain types of freedom that we cannot even imagine what it means to lose them. We are used to maybe having to get a visa to enter another country. We cannot imagine anymore that maybe our government decides that we are not allowed to leave the country. My own children are thinking about what they should study, maybe too many choices, but in the past, young people were being told what they have to study. Being able to choose which doctor you use, or having a system, a system that helps you to go to use medical care, that helps you in your life. It's something that is we should cherish, and governments take decisions that affect our lives, and having the possibility to influence that, it's something that is important. I've lived for many years in Switzerland. I never had the opportunity to vote here. But going to the market on a Saturday and hear my friends talk about what they were going to vote in the next referendum, and having really informed and interesting discussions on the different advantages and disadvantages of a certain change in tax law, for instance, I found that fascinating, and I hope that your children continue to support that.
I will tell their mom to make sure that it happens. We heard a big word, and it used to be a bad word during the talk. We heard about industrial policy, and when I was a student and when I was starting as a professor, this is something that we could never really mention, because free market would solve the day. The state had to play a very minimal role in pretty much anything. And so now we're in the process where we see this word happen again, and so it happened in your speech. So maybe any one of you could tell us something about what industrial policy should or shouldn't be, and why we need it now. Maybe you can start with you.
Can you repeat?
What is the need for?
Because you have to understand that I am very old.
What is the need for industrial policy now?
Oh. Look, I was teaching for 20 years that, and I not even know that. Now, really, the problem is, let's say, to have you need some success. I am very simple in that, so you have to choose. Let's say some sort of industry or product or also scientific result in which you have success. I believe in uneven development, you know, and second, you have to be in some field the first of the world, because this is some sort of infection, positive infection. So the problem really is to choose. You know, when you think the incredible success of the Dutch company producing machinery for chips, you know, for me this has been really an occasion for meditation, because this was long-term investment in one direction, and studying the success of China in the batteries or in solar energy, there was nothing special, simply long-term strategy in one direction. And so the success has been incredible, because they have reached the economic of scale before the other countries. And when you have the economic of scale, nobody can compete with you. And so the problem is to make one or two or three choices in which you make a plan for something. We are losing now the so-called artificial intelligence, you know, but you can also divide these big issues in some specific niche. And so we go back to the problem of choices, and of course, as I hinted before, to have the massive investments in one direction.
So from the OECD.
Oh, it's a very important topic for us. It is likely to be the theme of the next ministerial conference at OECD, so that will be early June 2026. I've also been experiencing this history of we are not allowed to use the term industrial policy. I started to work in the World Trade Organization in 1999, and in the early 2000s, Danny Roderick wrote an article on industrial policy for the 21st century. And I happened to have read this article when I met my director on the floor, and I said to him, oh, I just read this really interesting article on the industrial policy for the 21st century. And you know what his answer was? Marion, I always knew that you are a Marxist. And I was very surprised, and I tell this anecdote notably because I think it tells something about what went wrong at some time in economics, in university, in institutions, because if an article is interesting or a reader finds it interesting, let's debate, let's discuss, but let us not say, don't mention the word industrial policy. Now, what is the challenge when you work on international trade with industrial policy? One element of industrial policies are typically subsidies. And subsidies is spending taxpayers' money. And if you don't spend, first, at the national level, if you don't spend the taxpayers' money well, then it's a waste. And there are many examples of governments investing in building up a national car industry, a national aircraft industry, and it's not working. So then you waste the money. From an international perspective, it's a problem if multiple countries invest at the same time in the same thing. So now if everybody invests massively in solar panels or massively in semiconductors, you will be over-investing and overspending. And that's probably, by the way, what has happened in China in solar panels. They have been subsidizing so much that production is too high now. And a lot of the subsidization has been wasted. So you need, when you have open markets, the challenge is that you need then rules on how do you avoid that you just spend money in a subsidies race, like you have tariff wars, you can have subsidy races. That's what the World Trade Organization is supposed to be looking at. The World Trade Organization had subsidy rules. They didn't have industrial policy rules, but in the negotiations for the last ministerial conference for Abu Dhabi, in the draft text, the term industrial policy appeared. It wasn't there at the end, but it was there in the draft text. So maybe it will be back at the next ministerial conference. In the meantime, at the OECD, we are discussing the topic, and an interesting thing at the OECD is that we have committees that work with ministries that do industrial policy. Then you have committees that work with the trade ministry. I take care of them. We are a bit hesitant about industrial policy. And you have the economics department that looks at industrial policy through a spending of fiscal funding type of lens. And what we can do at the OECD is bring these disciplines together. And we can also bring the ministries together to look at an optimal design. Hopefully more early June out of our ministerial conference.
Thank you. So before we open to the students, I would like to close with one topic that hasn't been discussed that much this morning, is the importance of the media and the role of the media in this changing world. So maybe directed to you, Mr. Emmott, as a former executive in the media. So what do you think is the role of the media in this current situation?
Well, people often ask me, I find, particularly as I get older, is there a future for journalism? And the answer is, there is an amazing future for journalism. Journalism is easier than it's ever been before. Information is easier to get. The world is your oyster as far as knowing what's going on, data and so forth. The problem is getting paid to do it. So there's a business model issue in the media. But the media, in terms of the demand for information, the demand for comment, has never been more abundant. It's complicated hugely by so-called social media. In other words, by publishing by all of us as individuals, and by the ability of individuals to share information through social media, which has both complicated trust in the media, because that's, in a way, what's the issue behind some of your question. Why should you trust what Bill Emmott says when somebody said on Blue Sky or X yesterday something different? Why, I think I trust her, not him. So there's that issue. But what social media has done above all is disrupt the business model of the media by essentially taking away the advertising that subsidized the media. So we in the media have to find new business models. Overwhelmingly, those business models will be subscription business models in which you have to persuade your readers, viewers, listeners, whatever, that what you're doing is worth paying. And I think that's fantastic. It's a source of integrity and honesty that as journalists, as publishers, as broadcasters, you need to convince people to pay you to do it. And I'm old-fashioned. I think that actually produces, I think, a golden future, in a way, for honest, reliable journalism. And as Groucho Marx said, the great thing about sincerity is that if you can fake it, you've got it made.
Thanks a lot.
How can you be paid if there is an oversupply of information? When there is oversupply, you don't pay anybody.
I remember years ago having the chief executive of BMW come to lunch, and I said to him, isn't there a problem? There's an oversupply in the car industry, prices are going down. He said, yes, there's an oversupply of cars, but there's a scarcity of BMWs. And our task, Martin Wolf's task, my task, everyone's task, is to convince people that what we do is the scarce thing. So there's a supply of information, but there's a shortage of understanding.
Yeah, but you need skilled buyers.
Well, yes, we do need well-educated buyers, which means the students of the Università della Svizzera Italiana who are learning fantastic skills to become great buyers of our information.